Everybody. So we're going to go ahead and start module 3 of modern social problems. And we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about economics. We're going to talk about population, urbanization, a lot of talk about poverty, a lot of talk about hunger. And so those are going to be really our core topics. Now, all of these things that we talk about are going to be, again, your class and your economic stability, impact are impacted by all of your different identities. So race, gender, sexuality, ability, or disability, all of these things are going, age, etc. They're all the categories are going to impact these things. And we are not going to, in this particular module, get into how all of those things impact your particularly your class function. Those are going to be talked about in other modules because this book tries to break it down really distinctively into identity categories. So we're talking about class, and then we'll have a section on race, and we have a section on gender. And we all know that like these things interact because we can't just be one of these at any given time. However, we're going to specifically try to hone in on kind of economic theory and more big level conversations as opposed to at an individual level as much. And because of that, I have added in the beginning kind of the basic understanding of how our economic system works here in the US. And I wanted to let you guys know that that's in there, and it has in there a bunch of links to different YouTubes, different little short videos to kind of explain the things that I'm talking about. And I will put all of those links in the folder with this particular lecture series. And I want you to watch them because they're little short, like 2 to 6 minute things that you can watch real quick on YouTube. And they'll help explain to you the kind of general US understanding of economics and where we are and how we got there without having to dive deep into economic theory in a way that most people don't want to do. And so I kind of want to give you that preface before we get into socioeconomic status so that you kind of understand how the system works and how it impacts, I guess, where one's socioeconomic status is. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and share my screen and get into the lectures. All right, so we're going to start with this economics conversation, and then we will get into, hold on, it's trying, and then we'll get into a conversation specifically about chapter 7 and chapter 12. Maybe. I broke it. All right, let me try that one more time. Technical difficulties, I apologize. All right, here we go. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the two main economic like camps or essentially ideal bases that happen in the United States. And there's the first one is really that America's driving economic ideologies are those in the realm of fiscal conservatives. This ideology, again, derives from Adam Smith's ideas that essentially the market will kind of regulate itself. By that, they mean if there's more supply, then someone's going to have to increase demand. And if there's more demand, then they're going to have to increase the supply. And that's going to regulate essentially how much of a product is worth, how much of it needs to be made, and how much inflation is going to go up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this camp also believes that there's less governmental control is necessary, and that will actually help the economic stability of the people within the society. This school of thought also deploys ideas related to Keynesian and that are derived into the Reagan era economics of trickle-down economy, which we're going to get into trickle-down here in a minute. I have an entire little section on that and lots of videos that are surrounding that and kind of its criticisms and et cetera, so that you guys can really understand that a little bit better, because these are things that are talked about in our society and things that are specifically talked about when we go into things like voting and things like um, where you are politically, where you are economically. And so these are things to really try to comprehend as you go into society and start being active political members. Um, and again, this framework really boils down into these 3 points: that the rich have an influx of money from a thriving market with little regulation, and that money will then go back to the people in the form of job creation, pay increases, and industry expansion. Um, this school of thought also confers that lowering taxes on big corporations will also give more money to the top, and that will again turn into the aforementioned economic opportunity. So again, that job creation, pay increases, industry expansion. And then the last point that heavily influenced this group is the idea that property should be privately owned, and that the American dream is possible with enough hard work, smart enough economic choices, and that families should have a right to share their economic fortunes through generations of inheritance with very little economic taxation. And we're going to get into, again, some of these ideas and how they play out for different people and why some of these things are inherently built for certain individuals in society and not for others. The second economic camp is in the US is derived from Marxian ideas of market and social inequality. This school of thought understands that there are inherent flaws to the capitalist structure and who can actively engage in it. So essentially, this is talking about what we kind of been talking about in class, where the capitalist structure is built on, especially in the United States, was built on the backs of slavery, on the backs of in the stealing of indigenous lands. These resources did not come, this labor and the resources of land and things did not come in a way that was that allowed everyone to be participants in the system, right? You couldn't all be capitalists. Like, there were people, entire groups of people that were consistently made to do labor without economic gain, that were inherently had their resources stripped from them, that any kind of economic gain would be, again, not allowed. The ability to be part of the capitalist structure, to own property, to have inheritance, to leave things to your those who were your children or your descendants in any way, and you may not even have access to those descendants. And so it's again calling out that fact that even now, as we talk about it, the idea of going into a small business or what have you, because loans and economic structures work in ways that are discriminatory, you don't always have that ability to garner the resources to start that business or to have that generational wealth, to have the ability to maybe have access to economic funds that would help you achieve the American dream. Or you may not even be able to step onto that ladder at all if you are stuck in an impoverished area that doesn't have a lot of job choices or educational choices or housing choices, or if you're just working on basic needs. And so we'll get into that again more as we move through the course. But this school of thought understands, again, that race, gender, disability, sexuality, nationality, religion, citizenship status, etc., impact whether or not one can access things like healthcare, education, resources, acquiring a job, being promoted, acquiring a bank account, having family wealth, etc. This group fundamentally relies on these ideas that the government needs to have social support and social welfare because the market is built on unequal opportunities, and economic circumstances are socially constructed within a system of power that is disproportionate to those who were already wealthy and who have social factors that increase their chances of acquiring those opportunities. So those who are male, white, able-bodied, straight, Christian, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This group also discusses the ideas that resources are finite in nature, and thus without regulations, there can be destruction of natural resources and the inability to accumulate more of that resource. So you're taking more than the earth can reproduce naturally. It also says that this group also discusses the way in which wealth gaps have increased disproportionately to how tax breaks for the rich have not resulted in an elevation of the working and middle classes. This group adamantly opposes tax decreases for the rich and works for tax increases for those in the top 10% and increasingly so for those in the top 1 or 2%. And again, this is looking at trying to acquire money for those social programs, etc. But here's the kicker. The US doesn't really fit it specifically into one camp or the other, right? We have social welfare systems, but we also have deregulation of certain kinds of industries and leaving certain industries to, say, make the certain medications cost however much they want to, or healthcare cost as much as they want to, compared to maybe some other countries who do those things and regulate those markets very differently and have a lot more governmental influence. And so really the US is inherently a mix of these two. And there's a crash course sociology that really gets into how this mix happens and why. And that link is right down here, but I will also put it in the module. We're going to get into trickle down economics. So trickle down economics, increasingly sociologists and especially feminist scholars, and this has been happening with feminist scholarship for an extended period of time, have discussed why trickle down economics isn't working, right? And here's a short video to really explain that. But really what it gets into is essentially because capitalism is based on the reintroduction of capitalist gain into more things that will inherently make them more money. So stocks, into more resources, into more facilities, into more technology, into things that will actually produce more product as opposed to encouraging the economic gains of the people actually doing the labor for the products already being made, then what's happening is that money's not trickling down. Essentially, it's just reproducing the wealth of the people who are garnering it. And that isn't hitting the middle class and the working class, and especially not the lower class. So for more in-depth of a look into economic issues in this country, here's an economist professor, Dr. Robert Reich, and he is he works in I'm not going to even say. He's a professor of economics at a really well-known university in California, of which I'm pretty sure it's one of two, but I'm not going to say because I'll pick the wrong one. But essentially, he has these really fun videos. He does a lot of them. So if you check out his YouTube channel, there's all sorts of different topics of surrounding economics that he talks about and how economics impacts social justice, etc. But he also loves to do these doodles that go through history in a very fun way and explain the history of economics in a way that is literally through doodles. And they're really quirky and entertaining, and they'll keep your attention a little better and not be as dry. He also does a documentary called Inequality for All. It's a little bit older, but it does show an amazing amount of information. And the information is still valid because it's essentially, again, back on that topic of the historic elements. And it would be interesting, again, for you to look at that video and see how much has changed and in what ways it has changed. Is the trend still happening? What has impacted it, etc. But he does have lecture videos that, again, touch on all the topics that he was touching on there with more updated data on that YouTube. There's another one here, and that's a 2021 video about the pandemic, and he essentially is addressing Congress. He's one of the top economists in the country. He was an economic advisor to multiple presidents, but he's been in this particular element in this particular field for an extended period of time and is one of the US best known economists. So he's one that is really good to kind of garner how current events are impacting that. And then for a video on the expanding wealth gap, and I really encourage you to watch these. There's one on the US and then there's one on global. And they're really short and quick, but it talks essentially about the difference between the bottom 20 or even the bottom 80% of the population and its wealth versus maybe even the top 1% or 2%. And I have some graphs that I'll get into as we move through the material for module 3. But depending on if you're looking at this lecture as a student in 152 or modern social problems, or a student in a different class, some of you will not get the rest of these chapters. However, if you want them, please let me know and I'll get them to you. And then lastly, there's a video discussing how 2000 2010, how it impacted the middle class and essentially is shrinking that, and how the pandemic seems to be showing similar trends. That video is going to have some older data in it, but again, that data is still valid for that particular time period, and it's good to look at that compared to current trends and see how those dynamics may be changing, getting better, getting worse, or staying kind of on course. All right, so here's the deal. Here are the main points I want you to get out of this economics lecture, and so that you can kind of go into this information or go into whatever module you're going into, depending on what class you're in, and really have kind of your footing for where economics are in the US and why it's important to understand. One, economic inequality is directly tied to other social statuses, right? That intersectionality that we're talking about no matter what class you're in. And that the bootstrap myth that everybody can live the American dream is kind of devoid of that social reality that marginalized people experience. It kind of just overlooks the fact of that there are social networking hurdles, that there are institutionalized hurdles that are specifically put in the way of people achieving those the American dream, depending on the marginalized statuses you carry. And then 2, when wealthy obtain money, they're investing it. They are not investing it in the people. They are investing it in the stock market. They're saving it. They're acquiring their own resources, but they are not necessarily creating an economic boom for the classes underneath them. Those with massive wealth and power also have massive political and social power. They use this to lobby for things that benefit them, for lobbying of deregulation of safety things, to deregulate things like what's the word I'm looking for? Labor unions, etc. And those primarily, those people with massive wealth are going to work to benefit themselves. They are not there to benefit society as a whole. Again, there's going to be some exceptions, and most of them do philanthropy. That word's hard. Work to where they say, hey, look, we're saving sea turtles, or look, we're doing this thing. But that doesn't necessarily take away from the fact that overall, as a society, the massive amount of wealth that they're accumulating is even close to a fraction of it that they're going to be spending on any kind of social justice or social help or economic or ecological justice things. All right. 4, CEOs make over 300 plus times the average employee a month. Not the lowest employee, the average employee. I asked the question, and I pose it here, and I pose it to many of the people I talk to about these things. Do they really work 300 times harder than the average employee there? I highly doubt it. However, because there is this massive wealth gap, there's also this massive pay gap that's creating that wealth gap and attributing to it. And we have to really, as a society, think about whether or not that's acceptable and where that money should be going. 1 in 5 children live in poverty, and that poverty includes hunger, includes poor education opportunities, includes higher dropout rates, includes just a less promising future than we should be wanting for the children of this nation. 6, some social benefits like Social Security and disability are always going to be necessary. There are always going to be people in your society, no matter what the society is, that are going to need help economically because they either physically, mentally, medically, whatever, are incapable of functioning in the productivity that society requires in order for you to be economically stable. And seven, actually not last, second to last, resources are finite and capitalism cannot function without these resources, right? Um, there's a YouTube here, watch it, it's important, but also understand that as we move through more and more ecological ruin, more and more ecological disasters, more and more ecological scarcity for things like water, basic minerals, fossil fuels, etc. We're going to have to learn and adapt. Capitalism, to an extent, will adapt, but if it cannot, then what ends up happening is massive scarcity, massive increases in pricing for things that are vital to human um, productivity, to human even health, etc. And then lastly, wealth gaps and unregulated corporate power can end up not only hurting those at the bottom, but also decrease the spending power of the middle class and working class. And capitalism doesn't function without buyers. So if you don't have a healthy middle class or a healthy working class or people that are capable of spending money past the necessities, even for the necessities, you cannot have capitalism function at its highest level because it needs buyers. So, if you get nothing else out of these lectures, these are the important things to really understand about our current economic status here in the United States. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you want any more resources on any of these things, please don't hesitate to reach out. I have a DVD copy of Inequality for All, but I can probably maybe figure out a way to get that to you all. If I will have to do some finagling, but depending on what university you are at when you watch this, we may be able to acquire that if you are interested in watching that documentary. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you soon in the next lecture that we go through.